currency
for New World Order.
Those are the roots of trouble.
I imagine that right now you're feeling a bit like Alice, tumbling down the rabbit hole. Let me tell you why you're here. You're here because you know something. What you know you can't explain, but you feel it. You felt it your entire life. That there's something wrong with the world. You don't know what it is, but it's there, like a splinter in your mind, driving you mad. It is this feeling that has brought you to me. This is your last chance. After this, there is no turning back. You take the blue pill, the story ends. You wake up in your bed and believe whatever you want to believe. You take the red pill, you stay in Wonderland, and I show you how deep the rabbit hole goes. All I'm offering is the truth, nothing more.
For we are opposed around the world by a monolithic and ruthless conspiracy that relies primarily on covert means for expanding its sphere of influence, on infiltration instead of invasion, on subversion instead of elections, on intimidation instead of free choice, on guerrillas by night instead of armies by day. It is a system which has conscripted vast human and material resources into the building of a tightly knit, highly efficient machine that combines military, diplomatic, intelligence, economic, scientific, and political operations. Its preparations are concealed, not published. Its mistakes are buried, not headlined. Its dissenters are silenced, not praised. No expenditure is questioned, no rumor is printed, no secret is revealed. But I am asking your help in the tremendous task of informing and alerting the American people.
And now, welcome to another episode of Down the Rabbit Hole. Here's your host from federaljack.com. It's Popeye.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to tonight's live edition of DTRH. I'm your host, Popeye, and I have a special broadcast for you all this evening. It is my honor to welcome to the broadcast for the first time, but definitely not going to be for the last, a experienced JFK researcher / radio show host / I would say information archivist / historian. I could keep adding things on because he fits so many shoes. You've heard me talk about him so many times before on the radio broadcast and reference his work, and I am just but I'm just super excited to have him on the broadcast today live so I can pick his brain. So without wasting any more time, I want to introduce him and get him right up here so you guys can meet him yourselves. I want to welcome Mr. Len Osanic. Len, welcome to my broadcast.
Great to be here. Thanks for asking me on.
So I've kind of exposed the listeners to your work over the past 2 years. Not kind of, I have. Pretty heavily, I would say, over the course of like the past 7 to 8 months, especially with a lot of stuff from Colonel Prouty. But I want you to take some time and go ahead and introduce yourself to the listeners. Go ahead and tell them, I guess, start off with what got you into, talking to Colonel Prouty and investigating JFK and doing your radio show. What led you down the road that you're on now?
Well, I had an interest in the JFK assassination, just, as the greatest murder mystery maybe in the world. Like in a show, it would say, tonight we're going to expose, who killed Kennedy. And you'd watch the show, and then at the end, it would kind of say, well, we don't really know we're not any further than we were ahead of time. And so it was kind of like dog chasing his tail. So many shows talking about the JFK assassination, yet no one seemed any closer to solving it. I work in a recording studio, and I listen to music a lot, 12-hour days sometimes. So when I would drive home, I often listened to something else, anything other than music to turn on. I would listen to talk radio, and if I got bored with that, I would start to listen to lectures of people. And a few people would sending me from Los Angeles cassettes of important interviews, Michael Parenti, Dave Emery, things like that, Mae Brussell, a lot of Mae Brussell. And I started hearing things from her that were not on the news at all. but they kind of had a stark reality to them. And she would say that, look, if even 5% of what I'm saying is true, we're in big trouble. Well, that started my interest into this political intrigue of what's going on kind of right in front of us. And I was lucky enough to get a cassette interview of Fletcher Prouty talking about how the world works, and just, matter-of-factly, somebody interviewed him in his house, just, sitting down like you were listening to an uncle talk about, his first job or something. And I just struck me that this was the ring of truth. Here was a guy who knew how big power worked, how big banking money of the Pentagon, the U.S. military complex that we were supposed to be distrustful of. It just, the whole power structure that I had not heard of anywhere, and it just had the ring of truth to it. Like, here's a guy who knew. So after years of listening to these kind of interviews and getting everything I could, I found out with 1992 Oliver Stone's film that he had, not implicated, but used the character X to kind of, for the storytelling part of it, use what he learned from Fletcher Prouty himself. The X character is the guy who sat in a park bench with Kevin Costner and kind of explained what was going on in the Pentagon behind the scenes and the reasons why Kennedy was killed. And he didn't go into the shooters. He didn't go into names like that. He said, listen, the military budget, Vietnam, the Bank of Boston, helicopters, all these things are why Kennedy's enemies had him removed. And it dawned on me that, that Fletcher was somebody that I really wanted to get a hold of, and I thought, well, I'll write a letter to the dead letter department of his book publisher. And luckily enough, after 6 months, they every quarterly or by whatever they forward letters. So I wrote a letter to him saying, I'm not in the military. I'm not a writer. By the way, I'm a musician. I just have an interest in the history of the world we live in. And can you answer some questions for me? And I had penned 20 questions. And I had the good foresight to think about this. If I ever met anybody who really knew who killed Kennedy, what would I ask him? And once I had that gem of an idea in my mind, it took me about, a long time. I'm going to say 6 to 9 months before I ever finished my letter. It was like this little project. After my sessions were over, I'd run into the little office, and I had this thing that it reminded me of spokes on a wagon wheel. And I thought, if I can ask 20 questions that all revolve around the center, will I be able to know what the center was without having to ask that question? Because I had the good luck or the good fortune or whatever to hear Fletcher make an offhand comment one time when somebody was talking to him that, look, I don't like when people just come up and say who killed Kennedy, because I'll tell them a name and then they wouldn't even know what to make of that, and they haven't studied anything. So, in order to talk to somebody intelligently, they have to know the topic. They have to know the people in the Joint Chiefs of Staff. They have to know an awful lot to carry on a conversation with somebody as wise as him. And I think that good fortune of me taking months to write him a letter, and then when he got it, he was impressed with it. In fact, he wrote me a note, just said, listen, I got your good letter. It's worth replying to. Give me a little while, and I'm going to pen something for you. So even, almost a year later, I finally got a letter from him in which he answered 18 of the 20 questions, and he answered them in order. So it was even more intriguing that he left 2 questions out completely, like, well, what about, Curtis LeMay or something I was asking about. And it just happened that when he was a young, a teenager, he was a singer in the big band era. And before he joined the military, he was touring up and down with big bands up and down the East Coast of America. So when I wrote him a letter saying, I just have an interest, I'm not a writer, I don't have any axe to grind with the CIA, and by the way, I'm a musician, when he wrote back to me, he said, I'd love to talk about my old days of the big band era, and do you want to talk music and things like that? So I was just only too happy to talk to him. So we made this kind of friendship talking about music before we started getting back into political history. And it was just an interesting time, and that's, in a nutshell, how I made contact with Fletcher, by writing a letter and then just us hitting it off. And later, as I began to ask him more and more questions, he kind of grasped that I was really learning and I wasn't just someone who had heard, this guy's got a story, what's he got to say? And probably it took me another 4 years of knowing him, of going to visit him, being friendly, that he really opened up to me. And only by looking back do I realize some of the answers. Like for instance, when I mentioned he left a couple of questions off my first letter. Well, I realized he didn't know me from Adam. He just some guy writes me a letter. Why should I open up completely about everything? So, he answered 18 of my questions, and it's about 4 pages. It wasn't a chapter of a book or anything, but it helped steer me onto other topics. And the good thing about Fletcher, he was very wise. He knew an awful lot about a lot of things, and he didn't just work in the Department of Defense. He had other jobs. He was assistant vice president, Bank of Arlington. He worked for the Helio Aircraft Company. He was a speechwriter for the president of Amtrak. So he was very worldly. And saying that, he said he had visited 88 countries anyway on duty with the Department of Defense.
It's an amazing story when you sit down and you start to just read his history with the military. And I didn't even realize that he was he was involved in big band stuff. See, it's amazing because I always tell people you shouldn't. I always tell listeners you shouldn't put people up on a pedestal or look at them in just one light. Everybody's human. Here, you have an interesting anecdote about how Fletcher was human. He liked music. I mean, I didn't know that. That's pretty cool. So that's interesting that you guys had this little connection just from you sending him a letter. I always tell people when they ask me sometimes, how do you get in contact with the people you get in contact with, like the guests and stuff? I email them. It's as simple as that. You just reach out. It's amazing who's willing to chat and talk. So once you kind of hit it off with Colonel Prouty, how long before you guys, one day you guys just started getting into the JFK stuff and he started telling you things, the stuff that he told you, like the Ed Lansdale stuff and all this other stuff, or it just was a slow progression?
Yeah, it was a slow progression, but Fletcher had a great disposition. He was very articulate, very smart, and he turned around my way of thinking about a lot about the Pentagon and big banking and business. I mean, these guys are all very smart. I'd go for a walk with them at night, and all of a sudden we'd be walking along, and then, here, I want you to introduce you to this guy. He's a congressman, or here's the senator. He lived in Alexandria, Virginia, and he was in the hub of all this, and he worked in the Department of Defense, and he was one of the top 52 people cleared for pre-briefs and daily briefings out of 35,000 that worked at the Pentagon. So he was just a rare individual, and there was no one else like him. Here's the thing. Bob McNamara had written a book in retrospect, right? But I don't know too many other people who have written anything worthwhile at all. And I don't mean that to demean anybody, but I mean, if Henry Kissinger comes up with a tell-all book, I mean, I'm skeptical to start with, right? Or a lot of other people. But when Fletcher wrote or spoke about something, he was talking about what he directly took part in and knew that happened. And, his book, first released, called The Secret Team, The CIA and Its Allies in Control of the World, was kind of banned. It was released, they printed 100,000 copies, and then people went out and bought them up. The intelligence agencies didn't like that book being out. They bought the publishing company and closed his account. And that book never saw the light of day for years. When after 1992-ish, when Oliver Stone's movie came out, he was working on some articles that he was going to call The Saigon Solution, and it became the other book, JFK, Vietnam, and the plot to kill John F. Kennedy. And that book, got some leverage and got him back into the writing game. But when I met him, he was in his 70s by then. He was winding down everything. He thought he had tried to kind of warn America and anyone interested in what was going on, and there wasn't that many people doing anything about it. I think with the introduction of the internet and the fact that I was just becoming literate in web pages, and that I decided through his great disposition, how could I ever thank him for telling me some, things just the way they are. And I thought, well, I'll try to put together a CD-ROM of all his articles, all his, not all his photographs, but important photographs, articles, lectures. He had done some amazing lectures, or even some radio show appearances that were staggering. But if they were on at 7 a.m. on some LA talk show, I think that it got lost in the shuffle, and no one heard the importance of some of the things he was talking about. That always impressed me, that the things Fletcher seemed to know about that went contrary to news, like just talking about the origins of oil, or Gary Powers was that shot down, or when Japan attacked Pearl Harbor. I mean, were they really tricked into it? I mean, did the Americans know it was going to happen? And then you hear about false flag operations, which you never really heard of before. People had heard of, the Boston Tea Party. Oh, well, we all knew it wasn't Indians, wink, wink. And then they heard about the Reichstag fire, and then you never really get the idea that Fletcher sat in on some of these meetings that were brought out in Operation Northwoods, where governments would deliberately attack their own people and blame it on someone else to get somebody going. And, he passed away June 5th, 2011, so he didn't live to see 9/11, but I'm sure he would have been one of the first people to alert everyone, saying there's something wrong here.
Yeah, if he had lived past the June of that year, because it was only a couple months later 9/11 happened after he passed. And like I said to you off air, it would be interesting to be able to pick Colonel Prouty's brain right now and say, what do you think? Like, if we could sit down with him, if he was just as lucid and sharp as he was, sit down, give him the information that that's out there today, and say, sort through this, Colonel, and tell us what you think. Because I would love to hear what he has to say. I'm sure he would pick things apart, and I'm sure he would probably know things via connections if he were still around. I mean, it was amazing the information that he would come out with. Just listening to him talk about Ed Lansdale and Dealey Plaza. It's only like a 9-minute video clip, and I'm every time I hear it, I've played the audio on air before for the listeners when talking about the JFK assassination. I'm just so he just sits there and rattles stuff off like you couldn't go get the information that he's got from anywhere else, or ask for a better source because he lived it. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I mean, I share that same experience, and I can tell you one example. When in the Watergate era, people from England were writing and phoning him and saying, who are these burglars? What is there more to the story? And he was the ideal person to say, yeah, you should investigate these guys. They're not any average burglars, And I think a lot of stuff was leaked that way.
It's interesting that he knew Mae Brussel. I found out about her about almost 2 years ago now. I stumbled across her, and I was just amazed because I was listening to some of her broadcasts, from like the late 60s and early 70s, and my jaw was on the floor because the things she's talking about, I'm like, oh my God. Especially when you research this and you know what she's talking about. So it's interesting that Mae affected you too, like she was an influence on you too. That's kind of cool. We actually air her broadcast here on the network 5 days a week. We air her old archives because, I mean, you can't – some of the stuff she talks about, well, not really some of it, all of it, but especially when it comes to, like, the JFK assassination, or at least from what I've heard, the assassination or the mind control stuff that she focuses on.
Yeah.
Just wow. That's all I can say, Len, is wow. So that's cool that you were influenced by the same person. How many times, I didn't realize that she interviewed Colonel Prouty. Do you know how many times that him and Mae actually sat down?
No, I don't. No, I haven't come across Fletcher being on her show, but maybe she was. I mean, I tried to get audio and make a collection of anything I could Fletcher Prouty related, but
you actually have the I would say what would be the consummate Fletcher Prouty archive, and I tell people about it all the time. It's prouty.org, right? www.prouty.org, prouty.org. And
ORG. Yeah.
And they can get everything. They can get all the interviews. I mean, you've amassed everything that you could get your hands on, right? Any audio interviews he's done other than with just you. You've got other people's stuff too, right?
Yeah, but for Fletcher, what I tried to do is I thought I'll pay him back by putting together a CD-ROM of all his work. And the reason I say that because it wasn't well known, and the only fringe magazines would print some of his articles. And one of them was a magazine called Gallery, and it was kind of a low-budget Playboy magazine. So, and I don't mean that, but that was, any disrespect. But I mean, Gallery was one of those, low-budget, anyway, soft porn magazine, right? And he had written some great articles in there, but because of that magazine had come and gone, here were probably 30 articles that were unparalleled about the world politics and the CIA, and by bringing those back to life in the collected works of Colonel Prouty, I got a lot of articles and audio and letters to different people in there. Everything I could think of that would be complimentary to Fletcher that someone should know about. Now, saying that, I had cassettes, hundreds of hours. I mean, really hundreds of hours. But I tried not to duplicate things. So I thought, if somebody wants to hear Fletcher discussing Gary Power's shootdown, or Alan Dulles, or mind control, or oil, or something, I'll try to. In my opinion, I was pretty. I was close to Fletcher, but that was only about an 8 to 10 year period. It wasn't as if I'd known him my whole life or something. So, as friendly, as close to a friend you can be, where the guy opens up to you, that's how close I was. But he shared everything with me, but still there were some things that he didn't talk about, and there were some things I didn't ask. And, sometimes people say, well, if he was talking about some of these things, how come he wasn't killed? Well, his answer to that was that he did know there was a line that would be crossed. And he said, since I know the truth, I know where I can go up to. Somebody else who didn't really know the whole story could make the mistake of saying too much or whatever. But I know, what names I can name.
Yeah, see, he knew where he could draw the line without having to wonder if he was going to end up shot in the back of the head one day. I'm going to cut us off, Len, because we got a break sneaking up on us. Ladies and gentlemen, don't go anywhere. We'll be back in a few minutes. You do not want to miss the next hour and a half with my guest, Len Osanic. Go check out www.prouty.org. Prouty.org. We'll be right back. We are back, ladies and gentlemen. And Len, before we forget to go, we get sidetracked with anything because I have a tendency to do that. I want you to plug all of your websites, Twitter, Facebook, YouTube, anything that anybody can listen to your old broadcast or check out the Colonel Prouty archive or your radio shows or anything. Go ahead.
Right. Well, the main reference site is the Colonel L. Fletcher Prouty reference site, which is prouty.org. And also, as you mentioned, I host a show called Black Op Radio, and that's all one word, blackopradio.com.
And you have YouTube or Twitter or Facebook or anything that anybody can get in touch with you at?
Yeah, but you can find the YouTube videos and things like that from Black Op Radio.
Perfect. So it's all at Black Op Radio. There you go. So check out blackopradio.com and prouty.org. All right, so Len, getting back to Colonel Prouty, he is obviously a man who the information that he's giving you it's something to be taken seriously. It's not something. It's not like it's coming from some guy sitting in his basement. Colonel Prouty is I want to say distinguished, but that's not probably the right term. But we'll say, for lack of a better term, with his background, someone distinguished or whatever you want to call it. The information coming from him, it means something. It's more valid. You know what I mean? It's hard to take what he says and just tear it apart with an ad hominem attack or try to build a straw man argument. And I'm sure people have over the years. I've gotten emails when I talk about Prouty. Oh, you don't know the real man. He was this, he was that, and they try to put garbage out. But it's usually, I've never actually seen a real coherent argument against anything he's actually ever said, whether it be the JFK assassination or something that you brought up, which I think is really key and not many people know about, his take on the whole fossil fuel thing and where the term fossil fuels actually comes from. I mean, a lot of this stuff nobody knows about. But I haven't seen anybody try. I haven't seen any coherent argument be able to dissect anything he's ever brought to light. Do you ever get a lot of or any at all, any negative feedback on Prouty? Do you ever get anybody trying to challenge what he had to say?
Well, not very often, because I know Fletcher so well that I'm able to shut them down right away. And then, like you mentioned, these are irrational comments, right? Like, in one case, a writer was really complaining about Fletcher. See, here's the thing. Fletcher is a threat because he lived there. He worked in the Pentagon. He was a briefing officer, and he was the chief of Team B, which was right in the covert operations. And he never had to sign an oath of secrecy. This is so rare in government. Okay, so he got away with that by, at his department, when Allen Dulles asked him to come to the meetings, and they put him in charge of the Air Force, with respect to clandestine operations. When he said, listen, I work for the Air Force, we're the top dogs. You guys at your little CIA, you can take it or leave it. I have my clearances. And he walked out. And then Allen Dulles said, no, okay, it's fine. Because we realized at that time, we're looking uphill. The Air Force is proud and a distinguished organization. And the CIA hadn't got to that stature yet. Now, later on when he went to retire, he had a funny anecdote. He said that, because there was such problems in the Pentagon with leaking information, being in trouble, he taught his secretaries to never stamp anything. He said that if you stamp something, sensitive, ultra, top secret, whatever the thing would be, and then it got out, you would be in big trouble. But when he didn't stamp anything in his office, he took things home with him and it was no problem then. It just, what do you got? Oh, that's not top secret, so there you go. So that's how he ended up with so much stuff. And when I was aware of this, that's what I was mentioning when I became friends with him and started working on this CD-ROM idea that, well, look, Fletcher, you've written these articles, you have all this important paperwork, here are documents that have never seen the light of day, and, maybe we should do something with them. When I took about a 4-year period of my life to do that, that was, my kind of going to university or something like that. I got my degree in American history. And the thing with Fletcher, there's absolutely no one else. I mean, I can't, even if you're friends with McNamara, I've heard some things, these guys who are very high up there, I don't know what kind of truth you would get. With Fletcher, he would often tell you a story that, when you're just discussing oil, what he would say, well, listen to, I think the guy's name was Arthur Gold. Here's what a geologist Gold has to say. Or here, he would let you know about some important people and views that were coming out that were being suppressed. You can't call this a fossil fuel because that implies that it was plant life or dying dinosaurs or something that got caught in a tar pit, and that's where the oil's coming from. But he said, listen, talk to any geologist and ask them how far the Earth's core goes down for formerly living anything, and they'll agree about 12,000 feet. So they're saying, well, if you chop a mountain off, or you go down, under the water and you drill down. But these days, they're drilling for oil at 25,000, at 30, at 33,000 in the Soviet Union. So they're going, where is this oil coming from that you're calling a fossil fuel, or is it kind of a deception to trick people into this formerly living matter is oil? And now the oil companies have got a hold of that back in 1912 and said, listen, we're about to run out of oil and we need this depletion allowance. We think government should fund us to look for the last drop of oil because it's going to run out pretty quick. And, it'd be the same thing if they asked the governments to say, we're running out of salt water. Can you give us a depletion allowance so we can search for it, Like, what are you talking about? It's oceans of it. And I think, oil is the second most prevalent liquid. It's just astounding that when you look into some of the things that Fletcher, being wise enough, would say you should look into this, you find history is turned upside down. And it was like that with many things. And it took me a while as I was investigating things, putting, on his CD-ROM, that, well, he's talking about this Gary Powers flight, but he's saying it was sabotaged and the whole thing was a setup job. And just like that, the whole idea of a setup job. And I think that if you didn't know about the JFK assassination or studied any of this, an average person would say, well, why would the government do this against its own people? And, you know, you get a layman, average person, it's almost too much for them to think. After you study some of these and you find, some, you know, just history rampant with them, then you get a real distrusting, you know, bad feeling in your mouth that, you know, am I getting any truth at all? And now, you know, when you hear something about, you know, the gun control debates or 9/11 or all that, you think, you know, I almost get the feeling that the opposite is true. Whatever they're out there and waving around as a flag, I'm so distrusting now. I think the opposite is true. And, you know, if anybody doubts that, they should start off with looking into Operation Northwoods and read the documents and just how they were going to blow up, you know, a plane full of students and blame it on Cuba. There's stories about the USS Liberty. I mean, history, it just goes on and on. But
did you ever talk to Fletcher about the Liberty?
No, I didn't ask him about that. I mostly focused on the JFK assassination, and then we got into the Bobby Kennedy assassination a little bit, and then we got into whatever history I could handle. But I've got to say that, you know, I started off from, you know, knowing nothing to, you know, studying someone, you know, at the feet of someone who's, you know, right in the thick of it. And he would tell me something. He would say, you should really look into that a bit further. And that was like waving a flag to me, because he didn't say it too often, but he would say, we would be talking about a subject or something like that, like chemical warfare or something, and there's a story about AIDS, and he'd say, you know, you should look into that, you know, and that was enough for me to know that there's something more to the story, you know, that they were working on ethnic-specific weapons back in his day in the Pentagon, right? Now, an ethnic-specific weapons meant, could they develop a flu or a strain that would kill Oriental people or people of Russian descent or something like that? That it didn't matter the language or the political climate, but were they really doing that? And you know, if they wanted to do this population control and, for instance, kill Africans so that they could wipe out the continent and then take over, that's something that Fletcher heard briefings of whether they did it or not is a whole other debate. But he knew that these things were going on. And then you find these records, I think, in 1967 that this Dr. MacArthur is you know, briefing you know, the Joint Chiefs of Staff and saying that, you know, he's well on his way with trials and that of creating these kind of things. And it's just astounding. Your jaw drops. You're thinking, no way. And then you don't want to be so naive. You will say, okay, well, I'll try to look into that further. You know, I'll try. But you know, like with the Liberty, if anybody's looked into it, you come away shaking your head. And I think the quote from Lyndon Johnson was saying, you know, I want that ship on the bottom, you know, Americans shooting on Americans. And, you know, I don't know if we don't have time to go into that topic, but.
Yeah, no, I've actually, I've had a chance to interview one of the survivors of the Liberty, and I let him just talk and go. And we cut out the commercials and stuff from the broadcast, pretty much. We just let him talk. And I have to say that was some pretty moving stuff, hearing the story from someone who was actually on board the ship. So yeah, I know you know, I'm pretty well versed in the Liberty, but I would have loved to have been able to pick Fletcher's brain on a lot of stuff. I mean, I'm sure he had some interesting thoughts on that, especially, you know, in insiders' point of view would have been interesting. But the JFK assassination alone, I mean, that would take the hours and hours and hours of interviews that you have with him just on that subject alone is amazing. I mean, the amount of information he has and the stuff he knows, he can connect the dots on a lot of stuff. Again, one of my favorite things, okay, one of my favorite pieces of audio is this snippet where he's talking about Ed Lansdale in Dealey Plaza. And he's just rattling off, I mean, matter-of-factly, like, you know, like he's sitting there, you can almost picture him, you know, with his feet up, having a cup of coffee, talking to you, telling you this stuff, and just very matter-of-factly. And the way he's putting it together, you can't deny it. I mean, there's no way to, like I said before, I haven't found or heard any sort of coherent argument at all whatsoever that can refute the info that he brought forward in his conversations with you. I can't.
No, there isn't any. And further, the criticism that comes up is so clutching at straws. It kind of exposes itself. People have said, well, did Fletcher say something about UFOs? What is he, a crackpot or this or that? And then I say, well, why don't you read the article? Like, here's the article, and they're out there. So, or people say something about, is he linked to Scientology? Or is he this? It's like, it's crazy stuff. I mean, one wild one was that years later, after the Secret Team book had been bought up and put out of print, and the company kind of dissolved that signed him and bought up by somebody else, kind of as a lesson to them, somebody wanted to republish his book. And I saw the letter. They said, listen, we'd like to make a one-time thing. We'd like to print. We think your book, The Secret Team, is very important to American politics, and our company wants to publish uncomfortable books that are rare, that have maybe unpopular views, but that's what we do, and we want to publish this book. And he said, okay, they're going to give him X amount of money to publish 5,000, and that was it, right? Well, I think the company was called the Institute for Historical Review, a wing of something or whatever, but that book also published an author who said something about his book was the Holocaust was overrated, it never happened, the numbers are inflated, and well, this writer is saying, Fletcher's letting the profits of his book, The Secret Team, fund Nazi movement, and that's crazy. That's like saying, Warner Brothers signs Deep Purple or the Rolling Stones, but now they got a hip-hop band on there, and if you don't like hip-hop, shame on the Rolling Stones for being, picked up by Warner Brothers, right? I mean, it's like, what are you talking about? If a guy has a book, and Fletcher made this comment with me, he says maybe he's got a new theory about gravity. Let the guy write the book. You either like it or you don't. You subscribe to his theories or you don't. And if the guy writes a book and people point out the failings of it, and then, let's go on. So anybody who has ever talked about Fletcher's books, what he's written, any articles, there's been no constructive. There's nothing that's worth even talking about. I mean, it's people clutching at straws. Like, I think this McAdams guy on his website has got a thing where it says controversial views, and he goes, Fletcher thinks that the Churchill gang killed Roosevelt. Well, Fletcher had actually written an article saying that in Parade magazine, Elliot Roosevelt, his son, had said, I have an anecdote about me traveling to the Soviet Union and talking to Stalin. And Joseph Stalin was telling me off and said, your mother would not let my men go and visit the body. We think he was poisoned. We wanted to see the body for sure, and no one would let us, so that's why I never let your mother into the Soviet Union. And it's because the Churchill gang had him killed. Well, that was in Parade magazine, but you'll find stories about, Fletcher, believes it's the Churchill gang. I mean, you have to read the article, and then many people have written back to me who said, well, this criticisms of Fletcher aren't warranted at all. I mean, they're almost opposite, and you get the feeling that somebody's trying to do some kind of disinformation because that's not at all what happened. So, and especially you get into the JFK assassination, that's where Fletcher flourished, like you mentioned. He knew the people. He knew the stories. This wasn't the first operation. People that were overthrowing governments in the Philippines, in Indonesia, in Vietnam, all over the world, right? Then when it came to America, and Fletcher talked about that, a coup d'etat or a regime change, right? And putting Lyndon Johnson and his cronies back in the driver's seat, people find that uncomfortable. They think, oh, yeah, of course, in South America, we know some generals took over. No problem, right? But it's a funny thing. And, talk about matter-of-factly, I remember we were discussing one time about the Bay of Pigs and how it was strange that this Bay of Pigs was such a kind of, seemed to be a failure. Allen Dulles, the head of the CIA, it was a CIA operation. He wasn't even in the country at the time. And it was almost as if it was meant to fail. And when it failed, then Kennedy would have to call in the Air Force and the Marines to save the day. And he was wise enough to say, no, I'm not doing that. And I warned you guys I'm not doing it. And now you guys can all take the embarrassment. And then he fired Allen Dulles and fired Cabell. But Prouty made a comment. He said, you know, we have a base Guantanamo Bay there, which is the biggest, at the time, the biggest employer of Cubans there. I mean, you know, it was a big base. And he said, if we ever wanted to take on Cuba, we would have just made a phone call to the base commander, tell him to get the tanks going and just march on Havana. He said, it would be that easy. We don't have to have a whole invasion. We've already got everybody there. And you scratch your head, you think, that's right. They had this big base there. They just drive up and put an American flag up and say, we're in charge now. I mean, never mind all these, the story of the Bay of Pigs, it's another topic. It'd take a long time to talk about. But that's something that Fletcher knew, the intricacies firsthand.
In fact, when it comes to the Bay and Pigs, I've played the audio where he talked about, there's like a 45-minute snippet of him basically just covering it like very, not, he putting it in a Fletcher Prouty nutshell that, only he could. But, I've told the listeners, they have to get his books. They have to see all his stuff. They have to, that's why I always point them to his archive, because just the information he had packed in his noodle and was amazing. Especially, again, it's not just the JFK assassination, ladies and gentlemen. I mean, that was I guess you could say like one of his fields of expertise. But Colonel Prouty knew so much more about so much. I mean, and again, it's because of your interviews. So people do owe a pretty big thanks to you, Len, because without your interviews, look, I myself would not have been able to, if you hadn't done those interviews, maybe no one would have, right? And then that information wouldn't never have gotten out. I myself wouldn't have seen them and been able to play the audio, at least, of some of them on air for some of my listeners and educate them. So not only do I owe you a thank you, but so does the listeners and anybody that hears my archives and stuff. Because of your work with Colonel Prouty, I've been able to put that information out there and spread it. So, big thank you to you for stepping up to the plate all those years ago and recognizing that it would be a good thing to put together such a massive archive of his work. Because, again, if it weren't for you, dude, you've helped enlighten me, and as I told you off air, it was stumbling across Colonel Prouty and your work and your interviews with him that urged me to go and buy his 2 books and then go from there. And I'm actually I'm saving up because I want to buy the collective works that you have over at Prouty.org. And ladies and gentlemen, I can't plug this enough. Okay, I would have to sit up here with a bullhorn screaming on my desk to plug it any more than I have, and it still wouldn't be enough, because this is one of those things, like I told you with the Mae Brussel archives, when I found Mae Brussel and I introduced you all to Mae Brussel, a year and a half, almost 2 years ago now, and I started talking about her, and I've played some of her audio, and I've said, I've told you where to go get her archives. Well, I've talked about Colonel Prouty too, and I will push him and Len's website, because there's no other place to get all of the information. You couldn't go to any other source, no official government library, nowhere where you find the information that Len has over at Prouty.org. I'm telling you, there isn't any other place. It's like I tell people, if you want, the free ebooks, go to my free ebook section. There's a bunch of free ebooks there. It's all in one spot. Well, all of the stuff that you could ever want about Colonel Prouty and want to know is there. Now, no, it's not free because Len spent a lot of time and money and effort putting it together, but it's not expensive by any means. And instead of wasting money on an Xbox game or a couple garbage DVD movies from Holly Crapwood, go buy this stuff from Colonel Prouty. I guarantee you it'll rewrite history as you know it in your head. Okay? That's just the way it is. Ladies and gentlemen, hour number 1 just flew right by, as I knew it would. But relax, hour number 2 coming up. Don't go anywhere. We'll be back. Go check out Len's websites, blackopradio.com and Prouty.org. We will be right back. Ladies and gentlemen, we are back with hour number 2 here on tonight's live edition of Down the Rabbit Hole. I'm your host, Popeye from FederalJack.com. It is January 14th, 2013, and tonight I am joined by JFK researcher, L. Fletcher Prouty, archivist, radio show host, musician, and so much more, Mr. Len Osanic. And you can check out Len's websites, prouty.org, prouty.org. Check out blackopradio.com. Check out his radio show, because his radio show, he does a great job. He's got a lot of great guests on there. He's got guests that, I want to go cherry pick from his guests, because he's got some really good guests, and he gets into the JFK research deep. So check out his radio broadcast, Black Op Radio, blackopradio.com. And from there you can check out, like he said, any Twitter or Facebook or YouTube or anything else. All that stuff is linked up there, so you can find it. So, Len, I want to get back into Colonel Prouty, because he's such an interesting figure. And as I said, you're the only person around that I could think of that knows him and was close to him and has the info and would be willing to share it. You know what I mean? Most of anybody else that probably knows most of this is dead, because most of the people that knew this stuff were probably the same people that worked with him, and most of them are no longer around. So, first, I want to pick your brain. I wanted to ask you, and I had mentioned this during the break, but did he ever mention to you anything about World War II? Because I know he was in World War II, but did he ever mention to you anything that he knew about any shadiness with World War II? And as a side question off that, you can answer whenever. What did he think about the death of General Patton?
Yeah. He thought Patton was assassinated, and he went on just private discussion with me to say that the guy was done in. You study the accident anyway. Anyone should study that. And if you've mentioned you've already done some shows about that, I would say that's exactly what Fletcher's thoughts were about World War II. He had many things to talk about World War II. And I would suggest anyone get his book, The Secret Team. He discusses it there in length. But his specialty, I think, was the end of World War II, when World War II was winding down, and when these people in the intelligence agencies decide to graft a lot of what was Nazi Germany and just bring them over to America. And, of course, people know Werner von Braun, Dornberger, things like that. All of a sudden, they're generals in the, Nazi party, and then all of a sudden they're working for the Americans, and glad to be here. I think he thought there was a lot in the psychiatric field. There was Reinhard Gehlen, all those other intelligence agencies that were saying, like, we've been fighting against the Russians. We want to keep you. You can either go to prison, and Nuremberg trials, or you can work for us. So it's kind of astounding that Fletcher knew of these operations to go in and liberate some of these people before the war was actually over, that they knew what was coming, and they sent Fletcher and some other teams in to fly planes and go pick up these guys and say, look, let's get them out before the war ends so that they can work for us. And then that's kind of letting you know that the Cold War was already kind of in its planning stages, that the Soviet Union and the USA having this Cold War that didn't seem possible to end was already being in the planning stages while World War II was still going on.
Did he say whether or not he was not too happy about the fact that they were smuggling these guys over, or did he never mentioned any his personal feelings about it?
I don't recall him making an issue of it, but I never got the idea that he endorsed it. And it would be a number of small things that led up to him finally resigning, for his position in the Air Force. And, I think that's what, happened. Finally, he had enough. A number of people that he looked up to had already resigned as well. And over the years, they just said, look, this isn't what I want to be doing anymore. Yeah,
he obviously, it sounds like he got disgusted with the whole thing. when you sat down and you've talked to him about the JFK assassination, and you get into it with him, I know that at least I know that the plot of the movie JFK, where he sits down and he talks to Kevin Costner, Garrison. He talks to, Costner's playing Garrison, and he talks to him. He gives him all the info, whatever, as the Mr. X character. He never really sat down with Garrison like that in a park. But didn't he try to get in touch with Garrison or something like to that effect? But I know he didn't sit with him in a park per se. But and I know that a lot of that was what's his name, Oliver Stone, taking liberties with things that Colonel Fletcher Prouty had said. But did Prouty ever try? I don't remember because I can't remember if he did or not, and I don't want to say he did or not. So I figure I'd ask you: did he ever try to get in touch with Garrison at all during the investigation and let him know, hey, I have some info, or no?
Well, it's great that you bring that up, because he did more than try to get a hold of him. They exchanged letters. And one of the things on the CD-ROM I have is a series of letters between Fletcher Prouty and Jim Garrison. When they didn't want to talk on the phone, Jim Garrison thought his lines were bugged, and rightly so. And if you let me just kind of give it a footnote here. Zachary Sklar is the one who wrote the screenplay for Oliver Stone, and I interviewed Zachary Sklar, so that's on my Black Op archive, so you can listen to that. But Zachary Sklar says, I made, 95% of what is said on the park bench there from the letters that Fletcher and Jim Garrison wrote back and forth. And what had happened was, Richard K. Snagel is a guy that Jim Garrison went to New York to meet, and they sat on a park bench. And then they wanted to bring in the topics of all these letters and someone from the inside discussing what really went on and trying to educate Jim Garrison, and Kevin Costner's. When the movie was already approaching 4.5 hours, they had to do these script rewrites where they said, we just can't have him going to New York to meet one fella and then going to Washington to meet somebody else. We have to amalgamate them. So as not to put a name to him, why don't we just call him X, and we'll put the two together. And basically the two is everything Fletcher had written in his letters to Jim Garrison is said on the park bench, except it's on a park bench. Now, when you come across criticism on the web, somebody will say, oh, they never did meet. They never did meet. You can say, okay, they didn't meet. But what is the content there? What is it that the man X is telling Jim Garrison about how the Department of Defense is working and what's happening behind the back of Kennedy, who's doing everything he can to pull out of Vietnam and cancel this CIA war? It was never American foreign policy to do that. I mean, they had been trying to get out of it ever since they kind of ended up inheriting some from the French. But they were funding the French. So when the French pulled out, they were left there, and then they said, well, the CIA. I mean, it started the whole thing. I mean, I don't want to get into that, but back to the letters. On the CD-ROM I have, you can read all the letters, and you will recognize intimately the language of that 18-minute clip of Fletcher talking to, Jim Garrison. But just physically, they weren't on a park bench. Now, to me, when I've read the letters, and I see the back and forth between Garrison and Fletcher, and even there's more good stuff in there that didn't make the script. I go, well, this is such a inconsequential criticism that if they had written letters or talked on the phone, you can't believe anything that was said. I mean, it's just the opposite is true. This is the tip of the iceberg. And I would tell people that if anyone's interested in the JFK assassination, if they watch the movie JFK and watch it twice, this is the tip of the iceberg of what really has gone on. And anything you look into that is covered in the film, whether it be, pictures of Ed Lansdale and Dealey Plaza, or looking at the film or Commission Exhibit 399, it's the tip of the iceberg. There is so much more that matters behind that it's astounding that Oliver Stone got that film out. And I think he paid a heavy price for doing it.
From my understanding, because of that, and I don't know if this is true, but this is what I've uncovered, we'll say. that he's because I know he lives out in California, and they're one of the states that, the 3 strikes and you're out rule. He's already got 2 felony charges against him, and he's already been told that after his shenanigans with JFK, because he released the director's cut with extra stuff and everything else, then there would be no repeat of that, because if he tried that stuff with 9/11 or anything else, that he would end up being a resident of the prison system for the rest of his life. And I'm sure having already 2 felonies against him and them leveraging that against him, that's probably why he hasn't come out with anything meaty since then. The World Trade Center movie and all that didn't really focus on the conspiracy end of it. It was more of a the story of some rescue workers and things like that. So, and a lot of people have questioned that. So I mean, that's just my take on it. They probably got to him behind the scenes, because JFK was. I don't care what anybody says. His movie JFK, it brought that assassination back into the public light. It really did. It helped jumpstart people's interest back into the assassination of the president. What do you say?
Yeah, and the way I've heard it is that he said his career would be over, that he had such backlash for that. I don't think that he got told because of any record he'd be through. It's just that no one would fund any other kind of big project. And I think he made that 9/11 movie to try to even the playing field, and said, listen, I still want to make movies, and I just don't have to have a movie about the overthrow of a government anymore. I'm still going to try to make some films. But he paid a heavy price for the criticism, the unwarranted criticism, the Pavlovian ringing of a bell that the Warren Commission was right, and how dare anyone challenge that. And I'm telling you, you will be overwhelmed with the amount of information that, if you're unfamiliar with it, if you started looking into any avenue, the photographic evidence, the acoustical evidence, medical evidence, anything, the sabotaging of Jim Garrison, infiltrating the CIA, now years later, documents on how they're keeping tabs, and it's unbelievable that people do not recognize quicker that this Warren Commission was a complete fraud.
110% complete fraud. I mean, when you look at some of the people on the Warren Commission, like Dulles, I mean, how does anybody think that that's impartial? The guy got fired by the president. How do you not look at him? I mean, anybody that's doing even a somewhat of a real investigation would have to look at him as a suspect, at the very least, until you narrowed him out, right? I mean,
yeah, suspect. And
how are you going to have him as one of the investigators? That's like the fox, guarding the henhouse.
Yeah. His number 2, the deputy director of the CIA, was Charles Cabell. His brother, Earl Cabell, was the mayor of Dallas at the time Kennedy was killed.
Yep.
He's the mayor.
I've brought that up too, and I've seen conflicting evidence to say no, he didn't, and then yes, he did. But we'll say I've seen evidence, and people can debate it whether or not it's true or not. But that he had somewhat of a say on the last minute change of the parade route. That they'd be traveling with the motorcade route. So I mean, and who knows if that's true or not? But doesn't anybody think that it's a little odd that the brother of the guy he fired just happens to be the mayor of the city that he shot and killed in? But no, there's just coincidence. There's no conspiracy. It was just Oswald by himself, even though the headshot came from the front. That magic bullet just went all over the place. I mean, it's when you look at the official story, it's like, come on, really?
Well, what can you say? When you hold the bullet up at Commission Exhibit 399 and you say, look at this bullet made 7 wounds, and then developed, quote, reverse trajectory momentum to work its way out of the leg and fall, and it wasn't even the right stretcher. When people have investigated, that was a boy who came into that stretcher for a broken arm. I mean, it wasn't even Connolly's stretcher. I mean, like in the movie, they show Jack Ruby walking down the hallway and just planting a bullet. You know what I mean? It's just anybody who thinks Commission Exhibit 399 did anything but other than shot into a bucket of water is just deluding themselves, just delusional.
And then there's the the video, I forget, it was done by ABC, Peter Jennings. I can never remember his name, but tonight I can remember Peter Jennings, who interestingly enough died of fast-acting lung cancer, but that's a side issue, and all the listeners know how I feel about fast-acting cancers. I've already gone over that enough times, and that's actually even, there. If you watch JFK, you'll see in David Ferry's apartment the cages of mice that Judith and Ed Haslam and others have talked about they were working on weaponized cancer, but that's a side issue. That's a side issue. That's why I have to say, I hope somebody like rents. I said this the other day. I hope Ventura or something, or someone with enough money can go to Stone and say, "Look, how about I buy JFK from you for like 6 months and then put it back out in the theaters." Because I think today, again, the youth, the younger generations, the people that are old enough to comprehend and sit and think, I think that they would be shocked if they saw that movie today. Just with the information that's presented, and like you said, it's just the tip of the iceberg. There's so much more in that movie. I mean, they could have made a sequel if they wanted to, but that movie alone triggered an outcry amongst the nation back in the day. So I can only imagine what it would do now, because people are more awake, and the internet is more prolific now. So can you imagine if the younger generations of today went to the movies and said, "Oh my God, did you see this movie JFK? Oh my God!" And they started twittering each other and Facebooking and all this other crap that they do with each other and texting and garbage. I mean, it would spread like wildfire. And I guarantee you, Stone can't do it. You know what I mean? For whatever reasons, they, like you said, they'll blackball him in the theaters or whatever else. So there's got to be a way somebody like Ventura or somebody can come up with to like rent the rights to the movies for 6 months and put that thing back out in the theaters, because it's the 50th anniversary this year, and they're already trying to block anybody that has an altering viewpoint from being in Dealey Plaza.
Yeah. Well, look what they've done to Jesse Ventura now. His first 2 seasons were phenomenal, and the third season they made him look like he's chasing ghosts, right? And then they dropped 2 episodes, and they don't want him around. He's a real threat as well.
And they were supposed to interview. I don't know if you've ever heard of her. Her name's Judith Baker, but
I interviewed her.
Okay, well that's cool. They were supposed to interview her, and for some reason, I don't know, whatever, at the last minute, the producers canceled it, and she would have been on this season. So when you see, I'm kind of glad that they didn't, because you know what, I wouldn't have wanted her story and that end aspect of it to be lumped in with the stuff that's on there today. And I'm not saying that. I'm not making fun of the other stuff that they're talking about, because the paranormal and all this other stuff is important to look into. I've talked about it before, but you're right. It went from 2 seasons of government conspiracies and stuff like that, like 1 episode of UFOs, but everything else was pretty on point and uncovering some very real things. And then this season is, out in left field, and it's very, what's the hacky? You know what I mean? It's really hacky. I'm not bashing Ventura. He even said that they took the original shows that they had produced, and True TV being they, once they got their hands on it, they re-edited it. So they don't even have any idea what's going to air or when it's going to air. So you could see that True TV has obviously. I mean, they're whoever owns them. The point is they've been gotten to the power. The people that run things there have obviously been gotten to, and I'm sure. If he has a 4th season, if they even let him have a 4th season, it won't be.
I don't think he'll do it. And a telltale sign was they had a great music team and a narrator, and then on season 3, it sounds like some young kid is just talking about like, oh, and now Jesse's going to the parking lot. Like you kind of go, what happened to the show being authoritative and all that? Now it's just kind of you're not sure, and the whole idea of the show now is that it could go either way. Where before, if they were talking about, what was behind the BP oil spill, was it something sinister? Did people do, betting with stock markets, and were companies bought up beforehand? I mean, that's where he was going with that stuff. He had another episode for 9/11 planned, right? And his 2 that he did were phenomenal. I mean, I told him, I stood up and applauded the TV. I just couldn't believe it got on TV. His 2 episodes of about 9/11. And I was on the episode that was about the JFK assassination, right? He was on to have me discuss Fletcher Prouty, that I was living and I knew him, and people should look into him. But there's been many shows on the JFK assassination, so I don't know that it was groundbreaking, but his other shows were groundbreaking.
I would have to agree that the stuff about 9/11, I was shocked that got on air. I was shocked that the police state episode even aired the one time. It only aired once, but I was surprised that it aired even the one time. I couldn't believe it. I was like, wow, they actually put this stuff about FEMA camps on television. Of course, it was memory hold soon thereafter, but which didn't surprise me when it started disappearing off DVRs and things. In fact, I have the unfortunate title of being one of the first people to actually bring that to light, because I noticed that in replay the following week it was gone. And I started reporting on it, and originally people were like, oh, you're paranoid. And within like a day and a half, I had gotten over 100 emails telling me that people had the same thing. And then all these other people started confirming it, and other different alternative media sources started confirming it. And, We Are Change, a couple different chapters looked into it, and they confirmed it. It was crazy. And now, like you said, they're destroying the third season. It's just, I see the same thing. They're setting it up. I think this is going to be the final season, and that's why they're making it so hacky and campy, and that's going to be it. And then they're never going to let Jesse have that type of show again, because the first two seasons, whether or not people liked them or not, it brought some spotlight to some real serious things, and they can never have that again. Ladies and gentlemen, we got a break coming up. Don't go anywhere. We got the last half hour, my guest, Len Osanic. Go check out his websites, blackopradio.com and prouty.org, prouty.org. We'll be right back. Ladies and gentlemen, final segment of tonight's broadcast. Wow, time just flies. Make sure you check out Len's work, prouty.org, prouty.org. If you can, buy the collected works of Colonel Prouty. I think Len's got a couple different options there, but I suggest you just get the one with everything. Might as well just do it. Buy yourself an early Christmas present for 2013. If you're going to spend your money on anything, instead of spending your crap on some useless cable TV, turn your cable off for a month, or turn off your direct TV or your sports or all that other garbage, and buy this. Trust me, this will keep you glued to the computer, or however you watch it. It'll keep you glued to the learning experience that this is, rather than watching sports or some other crap. Go over there and buy it. Trust me, I'm saving up my money to do so. So I'm not kidding you. I have a ton of other things I have to take care of, and you all know I don't have a ton of money. So, but that's besides the point. The point is, if I'm saving my money up for it, and I'm telling you to get it, then that's And you can ask Len. He's not asking me to say any of this. I've told you before to go get the collected works. Make sure you go to prouty.org and pick it up, and also check out his website, blackopradio.com. I promise you won't be disappointed. I mean, I'm sure none of you were disappointed this evening with having Len on. He's just an amazing resource of information. And in the final segment here, Len, I want to pick your brain on a few other things. Did Colonel Prouty ever talk about Bobby's assassination, RFK, Bobby Kennedy? Because I myself have seen enough evidence, that obviously the CIA was involved. That's a whole, 6 episodes in itself. But did Colonel Prouty ever say anything to you about Bobby's assassination?
Most definitely, and not to plug the CD too much, but there's audio interviews I've done with him conducted that he discussed what went on, and some of the inside key players that talked to him firsthand about what happened in the pantry. And that's astounding. And then also, since I had an interest in, the trial, and people were trying to get a new trial for Sirhan, I went down to Seattle one time to listen to William Pepper, an attorney, talk about Martin Luther King's assassination, and he told me he would be taking over for Larry Teeter, who surprisingly passed, and I think he was only like 54 or something like that, but he was taking over. And strangely enough, when I mentioned to William Pepper that, look, my day job, I'm a musician and I work in a recording studio, he said, I've got a lot of poetry, anti-war poetry and some things like that it'd be really interesting to set them to music. So I jumped at the chance to do that, and that is something that took me about 3 years to finish. And I made an album, an audio album of William Pepper reading a lot of his poetry, and I set them to music. I think it's 28 different songs, you almost would call them. And it took me years to get William Pepper over here. He was so busy and in demand. But that's something else I did on the side, drawing in that I'm not just doing research every day. I'm doing other things. And one of them is music, but every now and then it draws you into someone else who has a similar interest. And he is representing Sirhan, and he's made a request to have a new trial based on acoustical evidence that's available now. And I might just add this plug. There is williampepper.com if anybody wants to know what the court documents are. Bill's been nice enough to put them on the web, so they're there. And I'm not sure for all the legal names of them, but there's a lot of documents up there of making requests for a new trial for Sirhan, who I think was again a patsy, told to be there, hypnotized by somebody in some kind of programming mind control thing. You're at a shooting range. When I give you a code word, you just start target practice. He brings out a gun. Somebody's standing right behind. I mean, this is astounding that people don't know these facts. The coroner said Bobby Kennedy was killed with shots between 0 and 2 inches because of the powder burns on the back of his hair and the back and the clothing. Powder burns. Someone pulled a gun right up to Bobby Kennedy and pulled the trigger 3 times, and as he fell, and it was never Sirhan. I mean, it's just the fact that you can. His Thomas Noguchi he's still alive, I believe, but the coroner of L.A., and that's what he wrote, and he's been interviewed many times to talk about it. I phoned him and discussed him, but he didn't want to go in the air anymore. He's quite old now. I think he's like 85 or something, but he was well enough just to say, yes, this is, confirmed it's true. So when you hear that Bobby Kennedy, as a matter of fact, was shot from behind, they have more bullets than is missing from the gun. His only held 8 shots, I believe. I mean, you look into that and it's down the rabbit hole again.
And then they lost the ceiling tiles from the pantry. How do you lose evidence in an assassination of someone of that stature, a senator, someone who's running for president? Imagine that now, if somebody modern day that was running for president in the past, right, was assassinated during the campaign cycle and they lost the evidence to that assassination. Don't you think somebody would be pissed off? I mean, it's amazing that nobody even realizes this stuff. And there's really not a lot of work on it. There's one film I've seen that's good called RFK Must Die, which I'm trying to get in touch with the filmmaker, but Shane, he's a bit I don't want to say elusive, but he's not easy to get in touch with, we'll say, and at least for me anyway. And there's one other movie from Ted Chirac from back in the day. It's called I think it was The Second Gun title, or something like that, right?
Oh yeah, there is The Second Gun, but there is also the book and documentary RFK Must Die, which Shane O'Sullivan.
Yeah, that's it. Shane O'Sullivan. His movie and his book, I have both. The movie is, you have to see that movie, ladies and gentlemen. I've talked about this. If you can get it on, purchase it or whatever, buy it from Amazon, purchase it. That movie is amazing with the evidence. What do you think? You've seen it, right? What do you think about that movie?
Yeah, well, I mean, I've interviewed him several times and interviewed some of the other players, and basically the story here is that, without getting into the CIA angle, which I'm not sure if I subscribe to everything, but it's all interesting. But what is true is a reporter was walking around interviewing people, and when he was interviewing people, he actually had his little switch on the microphone which turned the cassette recorder on and off backwards. So every time he walked up to talk to somebody, he was turning it off, and then when he was just walking around, it was on. And so he was so disheartened that he didn't get any interviews. Then years later, somebody thought, well, if he was walking around with it was on, maybe he got the gunshots. And due to digital, technology, and you can put through something through A to D converters and bring it up on waveforms that everyone's familiar with now, they could go through. They found the tape, and then they had the guys, Von Prague anyway, and a couple of the guys, I forget their names, but the interviews are out there. I've interviewed them, and they may be on Shane Sullivan's documentary as well, that they definitely have like 13 gunshots going off, And some of them are on top of each other where it couldn't be the one gun. It has to be two guns. So therefore, for sure, they have evidence or two or more guns in the pantry. And then something which should shock any person who thinks they want to stand behind the American flag of the justice system and the FBI and the Department of Justice, anything like that, is the treatment of a young photographer who has happened to be in the pantry taking pictures at the time these gunshots were going off. And it is astounding, that tale. I mean, he had a 20-year battle just trying to get his photographs back, and then on the way to the courthouse, the courier was robbed, and that's what happened to the photos, And even in the other trial, when he was suing, he said, well, the Zapruder film got $16 million, so my picture should have got something. They brought, and I'm not sure if William Pepper was with that one. I'm talking about, anyway, I'm sorry if I didn't mention it, Scott Enyart. Jamie Scott Enyart was the photographer. And search his name, I have an interview with him, several. And he said, when we asked the courier company, in 25 years, the guy said the only time anyone's phoned and asked me questions was, how much is it going to cost and when will it be here? Somebody phoned up and said, what color is the car? What is the route they're taking? We want to know everything. So that this was a real setup job to hijack these pictures, as their way being made back their way to the courthouse. It's just a complete fraud. But you get back, if you ask me anything Fletcher had to say about that, he had a lot to say about it, and he knew, I think, a couple people that were pretty close insiders of the Kennedy campaign, and I think one of them was a woman who has just come out in the last year to say that she was in the Kennedy detail. She's one of the girls there that was supporters and volunteers there. And
she was like I think she ended up being like a newscaster or something later on, or a reporter, and she's just come out and she said later on, I was there, and there was a second gunman, and people were like, why did you wait so long? And she was like, I was afraid for my life, basically. I don't think people understand that they go, well, if this was real, come on, why would they wait so long? Go look at JFK's assassination and look at anyone that came out and said, I saw a guy on the grassy knoll. Go look what happened to Lee Bowers or any of these other mysterious deaths of witnesses or people connected to it. So why would anybody want to open their mouth? Of course people are going to be scared.
Yeah, and especially if you've been threatened ahead of time, And like other people, witnesses said, listen, if they just killed the world's most important man, if they just killed the president and they're flexing their muscles, they're not secretly poisoning his coffee and inducing a heart attack. They're shooting him at high noon in a Texas street, right? It's a message to the rest of the world. We're in control. We're going to shoot our opposition and we'll replace them with our guy, and we'll blame it on the flimsiest, most phony story nobody would believe. And, the Warren Commission says, well, you can't bring out the evidence for another 75 years. How's that? And what are you going to do about it? Wait 75 years.
Didn't they just push it back further? I think Obama pushed it back further, right?
Oh. When
he first came in? I mean, that doesn't say... I vaguely remember... I have to go back and look this up. I could be wrong, but I vaguely remember when he got in, he pushed back the release date of a lot of this stuff. Well, it's top secret, national security. How could any of this be national security 50 years later? Seriously. Well, it would tear this nation apart. Why? Because they would find out the truth that you're all a bunch of lying scumbags?
Yeah, exactly. And further, it would, I think, endanger the same old fun and games going on today, that people would start to ask, well, maybe 9/11 was an inside job. I mean, maybe those guys were from Saudi Arabia, but who sent them the money? I mean, who made sure they were in the country? I mean... all the things that Jesse Ventura's two programs brought out and more. And then they start to, well, what about the 9/11 Commission? That the whole thing's a cover-up instead of an investigation. Well, it would,
it's a whitewash.
Wouldn't go over well.
Yeah, it's a whitewash, to say the least. And no, people would not be able to, I think, honestly, I think they underestimate people. I think people will be able to handle it well. I think the powers that shouldn't be are afraid of the response to such information coming out, and they don't want to. They'd be afraid to, oh my God, some of us are still alive. We wouldn't want to be implicated. I mean, JFK's assassination. I don't know who came up with that little line that Pesci says as David Ferry in the Oliver Stone movie, but where he says, it's a mystery wrapped in a riddle, wrapped inside of an enigma. I don't know who came up with that, if that was Stone or if somebody actually said that, but that really is the truth. I know 9/11 is a huge event, but JFK in itself, the assassination of the president, was a huge event, and I can guarantee you those shooters were probably dead within a week. Not even. They were all probably dead and buried out in a desert somewhere, because you can't have any connections like that.
Well, you know something? It's funny, and I think anyone's first gut reaction is that. But I wouldn't argue the point. I think that Fletcher talked about a camp of trained professionals that are called upon when needed. And he told me it was like a resort. And he mentioned this. And he said that these guys are he made the analogy that, look, you got your neighbor over there. And he's a head of a Boy Scout troop and all that. And what does he do? He's an executioner at a prison. Now, nobody holds it against him, but when criminals have gone through the trial and all that and they're sent to death row, that's what that guy does. But in his daily life, he is, certainly a pillar of the community. And Fletcher made this point a couple of times to me, kind of, I think, saying you would never know who these guys are, that when they're called for the Philippines or Vietnam or Indonesia or somewhere in South America, and then they come back, and this isn't their first and only job, where you might get that feeling on a mafia thing, dead men tell no tales, but it might not be the case that the guys have said, good job, you've earned your retirement, or we might need you again. And we know you can, I'm talking about someone who's worked their whole life for the agency and really believes in the brotherhood and also believes what they're doing is right. I mean, it wasn't just a lone opposition. I mean, almost every big businessman had a problem with Kennedy and a new way of thinking and, a free, honest, open world. And, that's the problem there. I mean, you have to, if you want to know why Kennedy was removed, investigate who his enemies were and start looking at the Department of Defense, the CIA, which he was going to scatter to the wind, NASA. He was going to end the space race, right? Everyone thought that was a proud endeavor. You read National Security Action Memorandum 271, and it says, you've got 90 days to report to me on how we're going to share all our information with the Soviets. We breathe the same air. We drink the same water. It's about time we start getting along, and we're going to start by having a joint Soviet-American effort to the moon. And this upset NASA something fierce. These guys were all ex-Nazis. They hated the Russians. And all of a sudden they're saying, share all our technology. I mean, and then you talk about Boeing and the TFX fighter program, and I think Arthur Goldberg saying that the old boy network was not going to be happening anymore. I mean, the list goes on and on. Anybody who listens to, I think, JFK's speech to the U.S. steel industry, saying how you guys went around behind my back and how can you afford to raise prices when we've asked average Americans to tighten our belt so many times, shame on you, and I'm doing everything I can to cancel every government contract with U.S. Steel and ship it off anywhere else. I mean, it's astounding things. And when you hear that speech that JFK made to the steel industry, your jaw will drop. And you'll think, wow, no matter what you thought about Kennedy, there was a guy who stood up to big business.
Well, it took a brass set of balls to say that to those people, because those are the very same types of people and family and bloodlines that run things behind the scenes to this very day. He was standing up to the Carnegies and the Rockefellers and them and all their ilk and saying, kick rocks. I'm the president, and that's one of the things that got him killed.
And not only that, then he said, I'm going to print my own money. The hell with you. I've got a Treasury Department. So you guys in the Federal Reserve, you don't want to help fund something? And according to Fletcher Prouty, pulling out of Vietnam was the final straw. But I think not far behind was his distrust of the Federal Reserve and wanting to put America back, and printing his own money. I understand you can still find those dollars, the Kennedy dollars, in a coin shop or somewhere, but
they're probably worth a pretty penny. Not to use a pun, but they're probably worth a decent amount of whatever, or they go for a decent amount because of their rarity. But he did stand up to the Federal Reserve. He threatened the CIA. He threatened a lot of other people. I mean, I think all these. I think it was, it probably started off as one or two people pissed off at Kennedy, and people were like, "Well, calm down. We'll get him under control." Blah blah blah. And then as time went on, they were like, "All right, he's a growing problem, and this isn't getting any better. And if we want things to stay the status quo, then and be able to make more money and do what we want and change things however we want to change things and pretty much control everything, then he's got to go." And I said this before, I don't think that LBJ was the direct mastermind of his assassination. I do think he was in on it, because you don't kill the sitting president and get away with it without the vice president and the head of the FBI being in on the cover-up. So no, I don't think he was the mastermind of it, but I do think LBJ was involved. How deep? I don't know. I mean, I've seen I don't want to say I don't know. I've seen a lot of evidence to say he was pretty connected. But again, that the meeting the night before shows that he didn't call the meeting. He attended the meeting. So it makes one wonder, well, who called the meeting then? And if somebody else called the meeting, that means that somebody else was probably calling the shots. And LBJ, depending on how high up he went, was definitely not obviously at the top of the pyramid. But I do believe he obviously was involved in it. Even Jackie Kennedy said that. I think it's funny that they just released her tapes, and they talked about all this stuff. And then when they brought up, she said that she thought that in the tapes and stuff and in her memoirs, whatever it was, she said that she felt that LBJ was involved with Jack's death. And I'm paraphrasing her, but that's, for time constraints, that's what she said basically. And when you listen to like ABC and everybody else, if they even brought up, her stance on LBJ, it was, and I kid you not, you can go back and look, it was basically, oh, Jackie thought LBJ was a jerk, moving on, and then, whatever other topics they would talk about. And I was like, she thought he was a jerk? She thought he was involved in her husband's murder. It was a little more than she thought LBJ was a jerk, but what are you going to do? Len, final thoughts. We got about a minute here, minute and a half before the end of the show is going to come up on us. So what are your final thoughts?
Well, if you have an interest in Colonel L. Fletcher Prouty, who had a 23-year military career, 9 of those were in the Pentagon, 1954 to 1964, kind of an unparalleled time in American history. I run a website called Prouty.org. I think, what's the title of it? The L. Fletcher Prouty reference site. So you can find anything about Fletcher Prouty there. Further, there's a lot of audio, a lot of stuff free, articles, letters, and then there's also my show, Black Op Radio, which I continue interviewing guests and filmmakers and authors who have had similar topics I'm interested in. And I've done some music for William Pepper, WilliamPepper.com, and my own band. I have a website, thesecretteam.com, so you can hear my music there.
Awesome. Len, thank you for coming on the broadcast tonight. It was an honor, and I'm going to have you back sooner than rather than later. Definitely, you are welcome back whenever. Ladies and gentlemen, we are out of time. Make sure you check out Len's websites and go to especially Prouty.org and get the entire Fletcher Prouty collection. We're out of here, and I'll see you all again Wednesday night. Gary Franchi is my guest. Love you all. Peace.